In the earliest whispers of what would become the dragon priest tradition, when the mists of time shroud the ancient peaks of Skyrim and the frozen wastes of Solstheim, we find ourselves drawn to a figure whose very name was meant to be erased from history. Yet like the persistent frost that clings to the mountain stones, his legacy endures, carved not in monuments of honour, but in the cautionary tales whispered around Nordic hearths when the winter winds grow too bold. The dragon priests emerged from the shadows of the Merethic era, when dragons ruled the skies of Nirn, and mortals trembled beneath their wings. These were not mere servants, but intermediaries of divine will, standing between the mortal realm and the terrible majesty of their draconic masters. Among these figures of power and reverence, one would rise to challenge the very foundations of the world itself. In the rigid hierarchy of the dragon cult, where absolute obedience was not merely expected, but demanded on pain of death, the priests wore masks of office that concealed not only their faces, but their humanity. Each mask told a story of devotion, of sacrifice, of the willing surrender of individual will to the greater glory of the dragons. Yet among these sacred vestments, one would bear tentacle-like protrusions that spoke of different allegiances, of knowledge sought in forbidden realms where even dragons feared to tread. The temples of the dragon cult rose like stone prayers across the northern lands, their architecture speaking of permanence and divine authority. Within their shadowed halls, the faithful gathered to offer tribute, to receive wisdom, and to witness the terrible beauty of their scaled gods. The priests who presided over these ceremonies commanded respect through fear, their words carrying the weight of draconic law, their judgments final and absolute. Yet beneath this veneer of unquestioning faith, questions stirred like embers in the darkness. What happened when a priest discovered that he carried within his mortal frame the soul of a dragon? What occurred when the clear divisions between ruler and ruled, between divine and mortal, began to blur beyond recognition? These were not academic questions, but existential challenges that would reshape the very nature of power in Tamriel. The discovery of one's true nature rarely comes as a gentle revelation. For most, it arrives like lightning splitting the night sky, illuminating truths that had always existed but never been seen. When a dragon priest learned that he possessed the soul of a dragon, the implications reverberated through every aspect of his existence. If he was dragonborn, what did that make him in relation to his supposed masters? If he could absorb the souls of dragons, gaining their power and knowledge, what limitations truly bound him? The voice, that most sacred of draconic gifts, became the instrument of transformation. Where other mortals required decades of meditation and practice to master even a single word of power, the dragonborn priest found the ancient language flowing through him like blood through his veins. The Thuum, the very breath of creation itself, responded to his will with unprecedented potency. Fire and frost, force and form, all bent to his command with a facility that amazed even his draconic tutors. But with great power came great hunger. Each dragon's soul absorbed brought not only strength but understanding, not only capability, but ambition. The rigid hierarchy that had once seemed natural and proper began to appear arbitrary, constructed not by divine mandate, but by the simple application of force. If power granted the right to rule, then what did increasing power suggest about the future of that rule? The temples began to change, their decorations subtly shifting to reflect new understandings. Where once dragons had been depicted as objects of veneration, now they appeared in positions of submission. Relief sculptures showed dragons with broken wings, their proud heads bowed in defeat. The symbolism was clear to those who knew how to read it, though its full implications would not become apparent until much later. The corruption of power rarely announces itself with fanfare. Instead, it creeps forward like shadow at twilight, advancing so gradually that its progress goes unnoticed until darkness has already fallen. The priest who had once served the dragons with faithful devotion found himself questioning not just their authority, but their very nature. Were they truly gods, or merely powerful beings who had claimed divine status through force and fear? The answer to this question would come not through philosophical contemplation, but through action. The first dragon to face the rebellious priest discovered that the natural order could be overturned, that the supposedly immutable hierarchy of the dragon cult contained fatal flaws. When dragon souls began to disappear forever, absorbed into the being of one who had once knelt before the very creatures he now challenged, the implications struck the draconic community like a thunderbolt. The rebellion that followed was not a simple uprising of the oppressed against their oppressors. This was revolution in its most fundamental form, a challenge to the basic principles upon which reality itself seemed to rest. The priest who had once enforced draconic law now stood against it, his followers drawn not by promises of freedom, but by demonstrations of power that exceeded even their former master's capabilities. The masks of the dragon priests had always been more than mere ceremonial objects. They were repositories of power, symbols of authority, and connections to the divine essence of their wearers. When one of these masks sprouted tentacle-like protrusions, it spoke of influences beyond the draconic sphere, of knowledge sought in realms where the barriers between sanity and madness wore thin as parchment. The Prince of Knowledge had been watching, waiting, analyzing the potential of this unique mortal who combined draconic soul with human ambition. In the vast libraries of Apocrypha, where all forbidden knowledge found its home, plans took shape that would span millennia. The offer, when it came, was not mere power, but understanding. Not simple strength, but the keys to reality's deepest mysteries. The black books that began to appear in the priest's possession were more than texts. They were portals to infinite knowledge, windows into truths that mortal minds were never meant to comprehend. Each page turned revealed new possibilities, new applications of power that transformed the reader even as they consumed the information. The tentacles that occasionally manifested around the priest's form were not mere decorations, but expressions of his growing connection to forces beyond the natural world. The network of standing stones that appeared across the northern lands seemed innocent enough at first glance. Ancient monuments were common in Nordic culture, markers of sacred sites and focal points for ritual observance. Yet these stones pulsed with different energies, their placement following patterns that spoke of careful planning and cosmic significance. Each stone corresponded to a different aspect of the natural world, creating a web of influence that could theoretically control every facet of life within its boundaries. The beast stone resonated with the wild creatures of the land, offering the potential to command entire ecosystems. The earth stone connected to the geological forces that shaped the landscape, providing leverage over the very ground upon which settlements stood. The sunstone manipulated celestial energies, controlling light and shadow across vast territories. The tree stone, positioned at the heart of the network, served as the primary conduit through which all other influences flowed. The water stone governed the flow of rivers and lakes, the source of life itself. The wind stone commanded the very air, controlling everything from gentle breezes to devastating storms. Together, these monuments created a system of environmental control that far exceeded anything previously imagined, a network through which a single will could dominate an entire region without the need for armies or conventional authority. The corruption of this network would not manifest for thousands of years, lying dormant beneath layers of accumulated time and forgotten purpose. Yet when the moment came for its reactivation, the stones would respond with terrifying efficiency, their ancient enchantments proving more durable than the civilizations that had risen and fallen in their shadow. The population of Solstheim experienced the return of their ancient master, not as a political development, but as a force of nature. The dreams came first, visions of a masked figure whose commands carried the weight of absolute authority. Those who slept near the standing stones found themselves rising in the night, walking through darkness toward monuments that pulsed with eldritch energy. The workers who gathered at these sites moved with unnatural coordination, their individual wills subsumed into a collective purpose that transcended normal human limitations. They built structures that defied conventional architecture, organic forms that seemed to writhe and shift when viewed from the corner of one's eye. The materials they used combined traditional stone and wood with substances that belonged to no natural category, elements that existed partially in the mortal realm and partially in dimensions beyond normal perception. The chanting that accompanied this work followed rhythms that predated human language, phrases that seemed to bypass conscious thought and speak directly to the deepest levels of the mind. Here in his shrine that they have forgotten, here do we toil that we might remember. The words themselves were less important than their effect, creating a resonance that strengthened the connection between the physical world and the realm of infinite knowledge. The skull, inheritors of ancient wisdom and guardians of traditional ways, recognized the danger immediately. Their shamans had maintained vigilance for generations, performing rituals designed to strengthen the barriers between worlds and prevent the return of the betrayer. Yet their traditional protections, powerful as they were, had been designed to counter the priest's original capabilities, not the enhanced powers he had acquired through millennia of study in forbidden realms. The failure of these time-tested defenses demonstrated the extent of the transformation that had occurred during the long imprisonment. The being who sought to return was no longer merely a dragonborn priest who had rebelled against his masters. This was something far more dangerous, a consciousness that had absorbed knowledge from across the cosmos and learned to manipulate forces that existed beyond the boundaries of normal reality. The temple that had once been the priest's earthly seat of power emerged from its burial beneath accumulated debris like a wound reopening in the landscape. The structure had been designed not merely as a place of worship, but as a focus for energies that spanned dimensions, a bridge between the mortal world and realms where different laws of existence applied. Its reactivation sent ripples through the fabric of reality itself, creating distortions that allowed glimpses of impossible vistas to bleed through into normal perception. The architectural elements that had once seemed merely decorative revealed their true function as the temple's power returned. Dragon motifs that had appeared to celebrate draconic authority now showed their subversive nature, depicting the great beasts in positions of submission and defeat. The acoustic properties of the central chamber amplified certain frequencies while dampening others, creating an environment where the Thuum could be wielded with unprecedented power. The chamber designed for the absorption of dragon souls hummed with residual energy that had persisted across millennia, awaiting the return of its master. The crystallized dragon souls stored within these walls represented power in its most concentrated form, a reservoir of strength that could fuel ambitions spanning continents. The specialized apparatus found in the temple's depths suggested experiments that pushed the boundaries of what was possible, attempts to merge different forms of consciousness into something entirely new. The corruption spread outward from the temple like ripples in a dark pond, following pathways established thousands of years earlier. The network of standing stones responded to their master's call, their ancient enchantments proving more resilient than any conventional magic. The very air around these monuments began to shimmer with otherworldly energies, creating visual distortions that made reality seem fluid and malleable. The structures built by the enthralled workers grew more complex and disturbing as the corruption strengthened. What had begun as simple stone arrangements evolved into architectural impossibilities, buildings that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The organic curves and impossible angles spoke of design principles that originated in realms where geometry followed different rules, where the relationship between form and function transcended normal understanding. The black books that served as conduits to the realm of infinite knowledge began to manifest their true power as the barriers between worlds weakened. These artifacts, scattered across the northern lands over the course of centuries, created a network of access points that allowed knowledge to flow freely between dimensions. Each book contained not merely information, but fragments of consciousness, pieces of awareness that could reshape the minds of those who dared to read them. The knowledge contained within these volumes ranged from the merely dangerous to the absolutely catastrophic. Some books held the secrets of forgotten civilizations, their wisdom preserved in forms that could drive unprepared minds to madness. Others contained techniques for manipulating the fundamental forces of reality, methods that could unravel the basic structures that held existence together. The most dangerous texts dealt with the nature of consciousness itself, offering insights that could transform the reader into something beyond mortal comprehension. The realm of Apocrypha, where all forbidden knowledge found its home, existed as a twisted reflection of mortal libraries and archives. Here, the very substance of reality was composed of books and scrolls, their pages containing truths that existed beyond normal categories of understanding. The seas of ink that washed against shores of parchment held dissolved knowledge that could reform itself into new configurations, creating fresh insights from the synthesis of ancient wisdom. The tentacles that descended from the writhing sky of this realm were not mere decorations, but extensions of its master's consciousness, reaching out to gather new knowledge and draw promising minds into the infinite collection. The whispers that filled the air carried fragments of every secret ever learned, every mystery ever pondered, every truth ever discovered. To exist in this realm was to be constantly tempted by the promise of ultimate understanding, the seductive offer of knowledge without limits. The twisted replica of the mortal temple that served as the priest's sanctuary within this realm provided a base from which he could observe the world he had left behind. Through the countless eyes of his patron, he watched as civilizations rose and fell, as new forms of knowledge emerged and were absorbed into the infinite library. The patience he displayed was no longer human, but cosmic, measuring time in ages rather than years, planning for contingencies that might not arise for millennia. The three dragons that had served the priest in his mortal incarnation continued their bondage within this realm of infinite knowledge, their consciousness trapped in a state between freedom and servitude. Sarutar, Kruzikrel, and Relonikiv existed as extensions of their master's will, their individual identities subsumed into his expanding awareness. The power they represented was not merely physical but conceptual, embodying principles of dominion and control that transcended their original draconic nature. The binding that held these creatures was more than simple magical compulsion. It represented a fundamental alteration of their essential nature, transforming them from independent beings into aspects of a greater consciousness. The Thuum that had accomplished this transformation drew upon principles that existed at the intersection of draconic language and the incomprehensible speech of Apocrypha, creating effects that no conventional practitioner of the voice could hope to replicate. The bend-will shout that had accomplished this domination operated on multiple levels simultaneously, affecting not just the conscious mind, but the deeper structures of identity and will. Its three words embodied concepts that existed beyond normal linguistic categories, representing ideas that could only be fully expressed through the synthesis of draconic and daedric understanding. The power to strip away autonomy and replace it with absolute obedience represented one of the most terrifying applications of the Thuum ever developed. The mastery of this shout required knowledge that no mortal could have acquired through conventional means. Traditional Thum developed through meditation on the meanings of words of power, a process that could take years or decades even for the most gifted practitioners. The priest's understanding of bend will came directly from his patron, bypassing the normal limitations of mortal comprehension and providing him with capabilities that violated the natural order. The implications of this power extended far beyond its immediate applications. If consciousness could be manipulated with such precision, what did that suggest about the nature of identity itself? If will could be overridden and replaced, what meaning did individual autonomy truly possess? These questions had occupied the priest's thoughts during his long imprisonment, leading him to conclusions that would have horrified his former associates. The network of influence that the priest had established across Solstheim demonstrated the practical application of these philosophical insights. Rather than ruling through conventional authority, he had created a system that operated at the level of consciousness itself, making resistance not just difficult, but literally unthinkable for those caught within its web. The structures built by his enthralled workers served as physical anchors for this network, creating stable points where different realms of existence could intersect. The corruption of the Allmaker stones followed patterns that had been established thousands of years earlier, their reactivation proceeding according to predetermined sequences that spoke of meticulous planning. The tree stone, positioned directly above the priest's temple, served as the primary conduit through which power flowed to the other monuments. From there, the corruption spread outward in carefully orchestrated waves, each stone adding its influence to the growing network of control. The beast stone's corruption manifested as an unnatural compulsion that drew the island's wildlife into service. Creatures that had once fled from human presence now gathered around the monument, their behavior modified by energies that bypassed their natural instincts. The packs of wolves and bears that formed around the stone moved with coordination that spoke of shared consciousness, their individual awareness subsumed into a collective purpose that served the priest's will. The Earthstone's influence extended deep into the geological foundations of Solstheim, creating connections that allowed for the manipulation of seismic forces. The minor tremors that accompanied its reactivation were merely the surface manifestation of changes that affected the island's fundamental structure. The mineral formations that began to appear around the stone defied conventional geology, their crystalline structures resonating with frequencies that belonged to no natural phenomenon. The sunstone's corruption altered the very quality of light across northern Solstheim, creating atmospheric effects that defied explanation. The aurora-like displays that began to appear during daylight hours spoke of energies that existed beyond the normal electromagnetic spectrum. The shadows cast by objects near the stone seemed to move independently of their sources, creating an environment where the boundary between light and darkness became fluid and uncertain. The Waterstone's influence tainted the island's streams and lakes with subtle changes that affected the minds of those who drank from them. The contamination was not physical, but metaphysical, introducing concepts and impulses that made the affected individuals more susceptible to external control. The fishing villages that depended on these water sources found their populations gradually drawn into the priest's expanding network of influence. The Windstone's corruption manifested as atmospheric disturbances that carried whispers across vast distances. The voices that rode these unnatural breezes spoke in languages that predated human settlement, their words containing suggestions that bypassed conscious thought and implanted themselves directly into the subconscious mind. The constant exposure to these influences gradually wore down the mental defenses of those who lived within the stone's area of effect. The reactivation of this network created a feedback loop that strengthened with each passing day. As more individuals fell under the priest's influence, the amount of energy available to fuel his return increased exponentially. The calculations performed by scholars who studied the phenomenon suggested that without intervention, the barriers between realms would have collapsed entirely within a matter of months, allowing the priest to manifest physically in the mortal world with power that dwarfed his original capabilities. The arrival of the last Dragonborn on Solstheim introduced a variable that the priest had not fully anticipated. While his extensive planning had accounted for many possible complications, the emergence of another individual with the Dragonborn nature created a situation that required immediate attention. The cultists dispatched to eliminate this potential rival carried orders that spoke of the priest's recognition that his return could be challenged by one who shared his essential nature. The resistance displayed by the last Dragonborn to the priest's influence demonstrated the unique properties of the Dragonborn condition. Where ordinary mortals succumbed completely to the compulsions emanating from the corrupted stones, the Dragonborn individual maintained sufficient autonomy to investigate and ultimately challenge the source of the island's troubles. This resistance was not complete immunity, but rather a degree of protection that allowed for continued function despite exposure to overwhelming mental influence. The confrontation that ultimately determined the fate of both Solstheim and the priest himself took place not in the mortal realm, but in the infinite libraries of Apocrypha. Here, surrounded by the accumulated knowledge of ages, the two Dragonborn individuals faced each other in a battle that transcended physical combat. The priest's advantages were considerable: millennia of accumulated knowledge, the power of 3 enslaved dragons, and the support of a Daedric prince whose influence extended across dimensions. Yet the challenger possessed qualities that the priest had lost during his long imprisonment. The connection to the mortal world that the priest had severed in his pursuit of ultimate knowledge provided the last Dragonborn with sources of strength that existed beyond the infinite library. The relationships, experiences, and purposes that anchored the challenger to the physical realm created a foundation that could not be shaken by promises of forbidden wisdom or threats of cosmic retribution. The battle itself demonstrated the full extent of the priest's capabilities, revealing powers that had been developed through centuries of study in realms where normal limitations did not apply. The ability to exist simultaneously in multiple dimensions, to absorb dragon souls across vast distances, to manipulate the fundamental forces of reality itself. These were not merely magical techniques, but expressions of a consciousness that had transcended normal mortal boundaries. The 3 dragons that served the priest fought with coordination that spoke of shared awareness, their individual capabilities enhanced by their connection to their master's expanded consciousness. Sahratar's mastery of destructive force, Kruzikrul's command over the elements, and Relonikiv's ability to phase between dimensions created a combination of threats that would have overwhelmed any conventional opponent. Yet the last Dragonborn's resistance to the priest's mental influence extended to these enslaved creatures, allowing for combat on terms that the priest had not anticipated. The priest's arsenal of Thuum represented the pinnacle of what was possible when draconic power was enhanced by forbidden knowledge. The bend will shout that had enslaved the 3 dragons was merely one example of his capabilities. His mastery of dragon aspect transcended normal limitations, creating transformations that granted not just enhanced physical abilities, but access to powers that existed beyond the normal scope of the voice. The ultimate resolution of this conflict came not through superior force, but through the intervention of the very entity that had enabled the priest's rise to power. The Daedric Prince of Knowledge, having observed the battle and evaluated the potential of both combatants, made a decision that revealed the true nature of the priest's position throughout his long imprisonment. What the priest had perceived as gradual progress toward escape had been permitted as part of a larger strategy, a means of testing and refining his capabilities while maintaining ultimate control over his fate. The betrayal, when it came, was absolute and final. The tentacle that impaled the priest absorbed not just his life force, but his accumulated knowledge, his expanded consciousness, and the power he had gathered over millennia of study. The Prince of Knowledge had found a new servant in the last Dragonborn, making the priest's continued existence unnecessary. The absorption was so complete that it left no trace of the priest's identity, no fragment of his consciousness that could potentially escape or resist. The immediate aftermath of this resolution saw the collapse of the network that had held Solstheim in thrall. The workers who had labored at the corrupted stones awakened from their enthrallment with no memory of their activities, the structures they had built losing their malevolent purpose and becoming merely architectural curiosities. The stones themselves returned to their normal state, though magical analysis indicated they retained the potential for future corruption under similar circumstances. The temple that had served as the focal point for the priest's attempted return lost much of its active magical energy, but remained a site of significant power. The chambers beneath its foundations continued to hold artifacts and inscriptions that provided insight into the priest's research and philosophy, making the site valuable for scholarly study despite its dangerous history. The College of Winterhold established monitoring protocols to detect any signs of renewed activity, while the Skaal maintained their traditional vigilance against threats that might emerge from the weakened barriers between worlds. The corruption of the Allmaker stones had demonstrated the vulnerability of ancient magical networks to manipulation by entities with sufficient knowledge and power. The research conducted in the aftermath of these events led to the development of new protective measures and monitoring techniques, ensuring that similar networks across Tamriel could be better defended against future threats. The lessons learned from the priest's methods informed magical theory for generations, providing insights into the relationship between consciousness, power, and the fundamental structures of reality. The black books that had served as conduits between realms remained scattered across the northern lands, their potential for both enlightenment and corruption unchanged by their master's defeat. The protocols established for handling these artifacts balanced the value of the knowledge they contained against the risks of exposure to influences that could transform or destroy unprepared minds. The ongoing presence of these books ensured that the priest's legacy would continue to influence magical development long after his physical destruction. The philosophical implications of the priest's existence and fate extended far beyond the immediate consequences of his actions. His transformation from faithful servant to rebellious challenger to cosmic threat illustrated the dangers inherent in the pursuit of power without wisdom, knowledge without restraint, and ambition without moral foundation. The questions he had raised about the nature of authority, the relationship between power and legitimacy, and the boundaries of mortal potential continued to resonate through scholarly debates and theological discussions. The Skaal incorporated the story of the priest's final defeat into their oral traditions, presenting it as validation of their ancestral wisdom and the importance of maintaining balance between knowledge and restraint. Their version of events emphasized the price of dealing with entities from beyond the mortal realm, even when such dealings appeared to serve noble purposes. The rituals they performed to strengthen the barriers between worlds were adapted to address the specific vulnerabilities revealed during the crisis, ensuring that their descendants would be better prepared for similar threats. The dragon populations that had begun to re-emerge across Tamriel following the return of Alduin carried ancestral memories of the first dragonborn priest, their consciousness preserving echoes of the fear and outrage that had accompanied his original rebellion. The confirmation of his final defeat brought complex reactions from these ancient beings, some viewing it as justice finally served, while others saw it as a reminder of the vulnerabilities that even their seemingly immortal nature could not overcome. The scholarly community's understanding of the dragonborn condition expanded significantly as a result of the priest's documented capabilities. Previous research had focused primarily on the ability to absorb dragon souls and master the Thu'um without conventional training, but the priest's example revealed additional dimensions of this unique nature. The resistance to mental domination, the enhanced affinity for certain types of magic, and the potential for consciousness expansion under specific conditions all became subjects of intensive study. The relationship between individual dragonborn across time emerged as a particularly intriguing area of research. The priest's ability to intercept dragon souls, claimed by other dragonborn individuals, suggested hierarchical relationships that contradicted the assumption that all dragonborn were essentially equal. The mechanisms that allowed the last dragonborn to ultimately resist this interference implied that such hierarchies might be contested rather than absolute, opening new questions about the fundamental nature of this cosmic blessing. The temple complex that had served as the priest's earthly stronghold became a site of ongoing archaeological interest, its chambers yielding artifacts and inscriptions that provided unprecedented insight into dragon cult practices during the Merethic era. The deeper excavations revealed construction techniques that incorporated principles from multiple architectural traditions, suggesting that the priest had drawn knowledge from sources far beyond conventional Nordic building methods. The integration of Atmaran, early Dwemer, and even Proto-Oldmeri elements created a unique synthesis that spoke to the priest's willingness to adopt useful concepts regardless of their cultural origins. The specialized chambers, designed for dragon soul absorption, continued to emanate residual energy that resonated with draconic frequencies, creating environments where the boundaries between different types of consciousness became permeable. Researchers who spent extended periods in these spaces reported enhanced sensitivity to temporal fluctuations and occasional glimpses of events that had occurred centuries earlier. The College of Winterhold established strict protocols for exposure to these areas, recognizing that prolonged contact could produce psychological effects similar to those experienced by the priest himself. The apparatus discovered in the temple's central chamber represented perhaps the most significant find from the archaeological expeditions. This primitive Elder Scroll reading mechanism, constructed from dragon bones and enchanted metals, provided evidence of the priest's attempts to comprehend cosmic forces that lay beyond normal mortal understanding. The device's design suggested knowledge of principles that would not be formally documented until the Dwemer began their own experiments with temporal manipulation, indicating either independent discovery or access to information sources that predated conventional magical theory. The inscriptions found throughout the temple complex revealed the evolution of the priest's philosophical understanding over time. Early carvings followed traditional dragon cult iconography, depicting the proper relationships between dragons, priests, and common worshippers. Later editions showed subtle but significant departures from orthodox theology, with dragons increasingly portrayed in subordinate positions relative to the priest himself. The most recent inscriptions, dating to the period just before his original defeat, contained symbols and concepts that bore no resemblance to any known system of magical notation. The network of shrines that the priest had established across Solstheim demonstrated the sophisticated infrastructure required to maintain control over such a vast territory. Each shrine incorporated elements that modern magical theory identifies as surveillance and communication devices, allowing the priest to monitor activities throughout his domain while projecting his influence to distant locations. The construction techniques used in these shrines combined conventional masonry with materials that existed partially in other dimensions, creating structures that remained stable despite incorporating substances that defied normal physical laws. The discovery of hidden resistance sites provided crucial insight into the challenges faced by those who opposed the priest's rule. These locations, typically concealed in caves or other natural formations, contained evidence of communities that had managed to maintain their independence despite the overwhelming pressure of the priest's influence. The protective measures they employed combined traditional Nordic ward techniques with innovations developed specifically to counter the priest's unique capabilities, suggesting that organized opposition had been more extensive than previously documented. The magical analysis of artifacts recovered from these resistant sites revealed the development of counter-enchantments specifically designed to protect against mind-affecting magic of the type the priest employed. These protective measures were remarkably sophisticated, incorporating principles that would not be formally understood until the Second Era's advances in mysticism theory. The techniques developed by these early resistors provided valuable insights for contemporary magical practitioners dealing with similar threats. The Skal's preservation of knowledge about the priest extended beyond simple historical documentation to encompass practical information about recognizing and countering the types of threats he represented. Their oral traditions included detailed descriptions of the warning signs that preceded his return, the methods by which his influence could be detected, and the specific rituals required to strengthen the barriers between worlds. This accumulated wisdom proved invaluable during the crisis of the Fourth Era, providing the foundation for the protective measures that limited the scope of his influence. The shamanic practices that had evolved to counter the priest's potential return represented a unique synthesis of traditional Skal spirituality with defensive techniques developed specifically to address Daedric influence. These rituals operated on multiple levels simultaneously, strengthening individual resistance to mental domination while reinforcing the cosmic barriers that prevented incursions from other realms. The effectiveness of these practices demonstrated the sophisticated understanding of magical principles that the Skal had developed over centuries of vigilance. The failure of these traditional protections during the priest's attempted return highlighted the extent of his transformation during his imprisonment in Apocrypha. The defensive measures that had been adequate to contain his original capabilities proved insufficient against the enhanced powers he had acquired through millennia of study in forbidden realms. This failure prompted a comprehensive re-evaluation of protective techniques, leading to the development of new methods that addressed the specific vulnerabilities revealed by the crisis. The corrupted structures built by the priest's enthralled workers represented a form of architecture that existed at the intersection of multiple dimensions. These buildings incorporated organic curves and impossible angles that challenged conventional understanding of spatial relationships, creating environments where the normal laws of physics operated according to altered parameters. The materials used in their construction included substances that had been transformed by exposure to as the cosmic energies settled across Tamriel following the Great Revelations. The true depth of the Dragon Priest's connection to the fundamental forces of existence began to manifest in ways that would challenge every assumption about power, identity, and the nature of reality itself. The ancient network of temples and standing stones, once thought to be mere architectural achievements, revealed itself as something far more profound and dangerous than even the most learned scholars had dared to imagine. The reactivation of these primordial connections during the Dragon Crisis had awakened something that had been dormant for millennia. Across the northern reaches of Tamriel, from the windswept peaks of High Hrothgar to the ash-covered slopes of Solstheim, the very fabric of reality began to respond to patterns established in ages past. The Dragon Priests, in their original incarnation as divine intermediaries, had unknowingly laid the groundwork for a transformation that would span thousands of years and ultimately reshape the relationship between mortal consciousness and cosmic power. Archaeological expeditions launched in the wake of these discoveries uncovered evidence of a sophisticated understanding of temporal mechanics that predated known magical theory by centuries. The Dragon Priests had not merely worshipped dragons as divine beings, but had recognized them as living embodiments of time itself, creatures whose very existence served as anchors for the stability of linear progression. This insight had led to the development of techniques that allowed the priests to perceive and manipulate temporal flows with unprecedented precision. The standing stones scattered across Skyrim and beyond revealed their true purpose as components in a vast network designed to monitor and maintain the delicate balance between different streams of time. Each stone had been positioned according to principles that took into account not only geographical considerations, but also the underlying currents of temporal energy that flowed through the landscape like invisible rivers. The priests had learned to read these currents, using them to predict future events, and occasionally to influence the probability of certain outcomes. This temporal manipulation had not been limited to simple divination or minor alterations of chance. Evidence suggested that the dragon priests had developed methods for creating what they termed temporal echoes, manifestations of their consciousness that could operate simultaneously across multiple time streams. These echoes allowed them to gather information from potential futures, communicate across vast distances instantaneously, and even influence events that had not yet occurred in linear time. The implications of these capabilities extended far beyond the immediate concerns of governance and religious administration. The priests had recognized that their manipulation of temporal forces created ripple effects that could influence the fundamental structure of reality itself. Each alteration, no matter how minor, generated consequences that propagated through the complex web of causality that connected all events across time and space. As their understanding deepened, the dragon priests began to perceive themselves not merely as servants of draconic divinity, but as active participants in the maintenance of cosmic stability. They developed rituals and practices designed to strengthen the boundaries between different planes of existence, recognizing that the barriers separating Mundus from oblivion and other dimensions required constant reinforcement to prevent catastrophic incursions. The discovery of their true nature as bearers of dragon souls had catalyzed a transformation that went beyond simple power accumulation. Each priest who awakened to their draconic heritage found themselves confronting questions that challenged the very foundations of their understanding. If they possessed the souls of dragons, what did that mean for their relationship with time, mortality, and the cosmic order itself? This awakening had not been uniform across all priests. Some, like the one who would become known as the first Dragonborn, embraced their transformed nature completely, seeking to transcend the limitations that had previously defined their existence. Others struggled with the implications, finding themselves caught between their human consciousness and the alien perspective that came with draconic awareness. The temples themselves had been constructed to facilitate this transformation, incorporating architectural elements that served as focal points for consciousness expansion. The distinctive dragon motifs that adorned these structures were not merely decorative but functional, serving as visual anchors that helped priests maintain their sense of identity during the disorienting process of awakening to their true nature. Hidden chambers beneath the main temple structures contained apparatus designed to amplify and focus the priest's expanding abilities. These devices, constructed from materials that combined conventional stonework with crystallized temporal energy, created environments where the normal rules of causality became malleable. Within these spaces, the priest could experiment with consciousness manipulation, dimensional displacement, and other techniques that would have been impossible in normal reality. The network of temples and standing stones had been designed to operate as a unified system, with each component contributing to the overall stability of the structure. The priests had recognized that their individual transformations were part of a larger pattern, a cosmic evolution that required careful coordination to prevent catastrophic disruption of the established order. As the dragon crisis unfolded and the ancient powers began to reassert themselves, the true scope of this network became apparent. The reactivation of dormant connections revealed that the priests had created a system capable of influencing events across multiple provinces simultaneously. The standing stones served as transmission points for consciousness, allowing coordinated action across vast distances without the delays inherent in physical communication. This coordination had extended beyond the immediate concerns of temple administration to encompass broader magical and political developments across Tamriel. The priests had maintained awareness of major events throughout the continent, using their temporal perception to identify potential threats to cosmic stability and their network of influence to guide responses when necessary. The corruption of this network during the crisis had demonstrated both its power and its vulnerability. The same pathways that allowed for beneficial coordination could be exploited by hostile forces seeking to destabilize the established order. The tentacles of Apocrypha that had emerged from the standing stone served as visible manifestations of how the priests' own creations could be turned against them. The process of cleansing these corrupted sites had required not only magical intervention, but also a deep understanding of the principles underlying their construction. The last Dragonborn's success in restoring the network had depended on their ability to perceive the underlying patterns that connected the various components, recognizing how each element contributed to the overall stability of the system. The aftermath of these events had left the network in a state of heightened sensitivity, more responsive to magical influence, but also more vulnerable to future corruption. The Skal shamans, who had maintained traditional protective rituals, found themselves adapting their practices to address new vulnerabilities revealed by the crisis. Their ceremonies, once focused on maintaining general spiritual balance, now incorporated specific techniques for monitoring and strengthening the dimensional boundaries that the priests had originally established. The scholarly community across Tamriel had begun to recognize the implications of these discoveries for their understanding of magical theory and practice. The dragon priests' integration of temporal manipulation, consciousness expansion, and dimensional control into a unified system represented a level of sophistication that exceeded anything achieved by subsequent magical traditions. The College of Winterhold had established a permanent research station to study the residual effects of the network's reactivation, with particular attention to the ways in which the priests' techniques might be adapted for modern magical practice. However, these efforts had been hampered by the inherent dangers of working with forces that operated beyond conventional understanding. The development of new theoretical frameworks for understanding the relationship between consciousness and temporal mechanics had become a priority for magical researchers throughout Tamriel. The priests' achievements suggested that conventional assumptions about the limitations of mortal perception and influence were fundamentally flawed, opening possibilities for advancement that had previously been considered impossible. The practical applications of this knowledge remained largely theoretical, as the techniques required for safely manipulating temporal forces exceeded the capabilities of most modern practitioners. The priests had spent centuries developing the mental discipline and magical understanding necessary for working with these energies, and their methods could not be easily replicated without similar preparation. The ethical implications of temporal manipulation had become a subject of intense debate among magical scholars and religious authorities. The priest's ability to influence events across multiple time streams raised questions about free will, natural development, and the appropriate limits of magical intervention in the course of history. The discovery that the dragon priests had been active participants in shaping major historical events, rather than merely observers, had forced a re-evaluation of accepted historical narratives. Scholars began to examine records of seemingly coincidental developments, looking for patterns that might indicate priestly intervention in moments of crisis or opportunity. The psychological effects of extended temporal perception had become another area of investigation, as researchers sought to understand how the priests had maintained their sanity and identity while experiencing multiple time streams simultaneously. The fragmentary records left by the priests suggested that this expanded awareness had required fundamental changes in how they understood themselves and their place in the cosmic order. The spiritual implications of the priest's transformation had attracted attention from religious scholars across Tamriel. The merger of human consciousness with draconic souls represented a form of transcendence that challenged conventional theological categories, creating new possibilities for understanding the relationship between mortal and divine nature. The influence of the dragon priests on the development of magical traditions throughout Tamriel had been far more extensive than previously recognized. Techniques that had been attributed to other sources showed clear connections to principles developed within the temple network, suggesting that the priests had been active in disseminating knowledge even during periods when their direct influence was minimal. The preservation of priestly knowledge through carefully selected students who returned to mainstream society had created a hidden lineage of understanding that had persisted through the centuries. These individuals, bound by oaths that prevented them from revealing the most sensitive aspects of their training, had nonetheless carried with them perspectives and capabilities that enhanced their contributions to magical and scholarly development. The gradual diffusion of priestly insights through these hidden channels had contributed to the overall advancement of magical theory, creating innovations that appeared to emerge independently but actually reflected the continued influence of the ancient network. This subtle form of guidance had helped maintain the stability of magical practice during periods of political upheaval and social change. The crisis had revealed the extent to which modern magical practice had become dependent on foundations established by the dragon priests. The standing stones that served as focal points for magical energy throughout Skyrim and beyond had been created according to principles developed within the temple network. Their continued function had been essential for maintaining the stability of magical practice across the region. The reactivation of the full network had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything documented in historical records. The priests had not merely been skilled practitioners of existing magical disciplines, but had developed entirely new approaches to understanding and manipulating the fundamental forces of reality. The integration of consciousness expansion with temporal manipulation had created synergistic effects that amplified the priest's abilities far beyond what either technique could achieve independently. This combination had allowed them to perceive and influence patterns that operated across multiple levels of reality simultaneously, creating a comprehensive understanding of cosmic structure that remained unmatched by subsequent magical traditions. The implications of these discoveries extended beyond the immediate concerns of magical practice to encompass broader questions about the nature of consciousness, identity, and cosmic purpose. The priest's achievements suggested that the boundaries between individual and universal awareness were far more permeable than conventionally understood, opening possibilities for expansion that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of existence itself. The network of temples and standing stones had served not only as a system for magical practice, but as a framework for consciousness development that could potentially guide future generations towards similar transcendence. The priests had recognized that their individual transformations were part of a larger evolutionary process that could ultimately encompass all conscious beings willing to undertake the necessary preparation and training. The preservation of this knowledge and the maintenance of the network's stability had become a responsibility that extended beyond any single organization or tradition. The crisis had demonstrated that the forces unleashed by the priest's work required constant vigilance and careful management to prevent catastrophic disruption of the established order. As the immediate effects of the dragon crisis faded and Tamriel settled into a new stability, the true legacy of the dragon priests began to emerge. Their transformation from religious intermediaries to cosmic guardians represented a fundamental shift in the relationship between mortal consciousness and divine power, creating possibilities for advancement that would continue to influence the development of magical and spiritual practice for generations to come. The network they had established would endure as a testament to the potential for consciousness to transcend its apparent limitations, serving as both inspiration and warning for those who would follow in their footsteps. The standing stones would continue to mark the landscape, silent witnesses to achievements that had reshaped the very foundations of reality itself, while the temples would remain as monuments to the transformation that had elevated mortal awareness to cosmic significance. The dragon priests had succeeded in their ultimate goal of bridging the gap between human consciousness and draconic power, creating a synthesis that transcended the limitations of both. Their legacy would continue to influence the development of magical practice and spiritual understanding, ensuring that the knowledge they had gained through their transformation would not be lost to the passage of time. The network of influence they had established would persist as a hidden foundation underlying the continued stability of Tamriel, providing subtle guidance and protection against threats that might otherwise prove catastrophic. Their transformation had created a permanent enhancement to the region's magical and spiritual infrastructure, ensuring that future generations would benefit from their achievements, even if the full extent of their contribution remained largely unrecognized. The mystery of the dragon priests would endure as one of the great enigmas of Tamrielic history, a reminder that the apparent limitations of mortal consciousness might be far more permeable than conventionally understood. Their story would continue to inspire those seeking to understand the deeper mysteries of existence, while serving as a cautionary tale about the dangers inherent in pursuing transformation without adequate preparation and wisdom. In the end, the dragon priests had achieved a form of immortality that transcended physical existence, their consciousness permanently integrated into the fundamental structure of reality itself. Their influence would continue to shape events across Tamriel through the network they had established, ensuring that their legacy would endure as long as the standing stones remained to mark their achievement, and the temples continued to serve as gateways to the expanded awareness they had discovered. The secrets of the dragon priests had been revealed, but their ultimate mystery remained intact, a testament to the profound transformation that had elevated them from mortal servants to cosmic guardians, forever changing the relationship between consciousness and the fundamental forces that govern existence itself. The study of dragon priests reaches far beyond their roles as mere religious intermediaries, extending into realms of consciousness manipulation and dimensional transcendence that challenge the very foundations of reality itself. These ancient practitioners, elevated through centuries of draconic communion, developed capabilities that transformed them from mortal servants into entities capable of bridging multiple planes of existence simultaneously. The most advanced dragon priests discovered that their connection to draconic power served as merely the foundation for far more sophisticated applications of consciousness expansion. Through systematic absorption of dragon souls, they accumulated not just magical energy, but fragments of primordial understanding that predated the creation of Mundus itself. This knowledge revealed patterns within reality's structure that remained invisible to conventional perception, allowing them to manipulate fundamental forces through pure intention rather than traditional magical formulations. Archaeological evidence from recently excavated temple complexes reveals the existence of specialized chambers designed specifically for consciousness projection across dimensional boundaries. These facilities incorporated architectural principles that defied conventional understanding, utilizing geometric arrangements that created stable resonance fields between different planes of existence. The walls themselves were inscribed with formulaic patterns that served as anchors for consciousness during extended projection sessions, preventing the practitioner's awareness from becoming lost in the spaces between worlds. The theoretical framework underlying these techniques emerged from dragon priest recognition that individual consciousness represents only a limited manifestation of a far more expansive awareness that encompasses all possible states of existence. Their training methods systematically dissolve the barriers between observer and observed, self and cosmos, allowing practitioners to experience reality from perspectives that transcended normal mortal limitations. This expansion of consciousness proved essential for accessing the deeper layers of draconic knowledge embedded within absorbed dragon souls. The relationship between consciousness expansion and temporal manipulation formed a central component of advanced dragon priest practices. Their understanding of time as a malleable dimension rather than a fixed constraint enabled them to experience multiple temporal streams simultaneously, observing past events, present possibilities, and potential futures as interconnected aspects of a single temporal matrix. This temporal awareness proved invaluable for strategic planning and crisis prevention, allowing them to identify threats to cosmic stability before they manifested in linear time. The development of techniques for existing simultaneously across multiple planes of existence represented perhaps the most sophisticated achievement of dragon priest magical theory. These practitioners learned to partition their consciousness, maintaining active awareness in both mundus and various realms of oblivion, while retaining coherent identity and purpose. This multidimensional existence provided unprecedented access to knowledge and power sources, though it required extraordinary discipline to prevent consciousness, fragmentation, or absorption by hostile entities encountered in other realms. The dragon priest's mastery of soul manipulation extended far beyond simple absorption of draconic essence to encompass sophisticated techniques for consciousness transfer and identity preservation. They developed methods for storing memories and personality patterns within specially prepared soul gems, creating backup repositories of consciousness that could survive physical death or dimensional displacement. These techniques proved essential for maintaining continuity of knowledge and purpose across extended periods of existence in hostile environments. The construction of temple networks across Skyrim and Solstheim served purposes far more complex than conventional religious worship. Each temple was positioned at specific geographical coordinates that created resonance patterns with natural energy flows throughout the region. This network functioned as a massive magical apparatus capable of channeling and redirecting fundamental forces on a continental scale, providing dragon priests with infrastructure for influencing everything from weather patterns to the stability of dimensional boundaries. The symbolic systems developed by dragon priests for encoding advanced magical knowledge incorporated elements that operated simultaneously on multiple levels of meaning. Their inscriptions contained information accessible to readers with different levels of understanding, revealing increasingly sophisticated concepts as the observer's consciousness expanded. This approach ensured that dangerous knowledge remained protected from misuse, while providing guidance for those capable of safely applying advanced techniques. The relationship between dragon priest practices and the fundamental structure of reality became increasingly complex as their understanding deepened. They recognized that conventional magical schools represented artificial categorizations imposed upon a unified field of consciousness that manifested as apparently separate phenomena. Their advanced techniques worked directly with this underlying unity, bypassing the limitations inherent in traditional approaches to magical manipulation. The preservation of dragon priest knowledge through carefully selected successors created lineages of understanding that persisted long after the fall of dragon rule. These hidden traditions adapted to changing circumstances while maintaining the essential principles of consciousness expansion and dimensional manipulation. The influence of this preserved knowledge can be traced through various mystical organizations throughout Tamrielic history, appearing in modified forms adapted to different cultural contexts. The ultimate goals pursued by the most advanced dragon priests transcended conventional understanding of power and authority. They sought not merely to rule over existing reality, but to participate in the fundamental processes through which reality manifests and evolves. This ambition required them to develop capabilities that approached the level of cosmic forces themselves, positioning them as active participants in the ongoing creation and maintenance of existence rather than mere observers or manipulators of predetermined patterns. The techniques for consciousness preservation developed by dragon priests created possibilities for continuity of existence that challenged traditional concepts of life and death. Their methods allowed for the transfer of complete personality and memory patterns into various forms of existence, from possession of suitable hosts to independent existence within specially prepared dimensional spaces. This technological approach to immortality provided alternatives to conventional undeath while maintaining the essential characteristics that defined individual identity. The dragon priest's understanding of the relationship between knowledge and power revealed that these represented different manifestations of the same fundamental force. Their practices demonstrated that sufficiently advanced knowledge could directly reshape reality without requiring external tools or energy sources. This principle guided their approach to education and training, emphasizing the development of understanding rather than the accumulation of discrete magical abilities. The networks of influence established by dragon priests operated through principles of sympathetic resonance that connected geographically distant locations through shared symbolic frameworks. These networks could transmit both information and energy across vast distances instantaneously, providing infrastructure for coordinated responses to threats that might emerge anywhere within their sphere of influence. The sophistication of these systems exceeded the capabilities of conventional magical communication by orders of magnitude. The dragon priests' research into the nature of identity and consciousness revealed that individual selfhood represents a temporary configuration within a larger pattern of awareness that encompasses all conscious entities. Their advanced practices aimed at expanding individual consciousness to encompass this broader awareness while maintaining functional identity necessary for effective action within normal reality. This balance between unity and separation required extraordinary skill and represented the culmination of their spiritual development. The legacy of dragon priest consciousness manipulation techniques continues to influence magical theory and practice throughout Tamriel, though often in forms so modified that their origins remain unrecognizable. The fundamental insights they achieved regarding the malleable nature of reality and consciousness provide foundations for continued advancement in magical understanding, offering glimpses of possibilities that may eventually transform the relationship between mortals and the cosmic forces that govern existence itself. The whispered tales of the dragon priest tell of power beyond mortal comprehension. But even among these ancient tyrants, there existed secrets that would make gods themselves tremble. In the shadowed depths of forgotten temples, where the very stones pulse with absorbed screams, lie the remnants of knowledge so profound that it threatens the fundamental fabric of existence itself. The dragon priests, those masked intermediaries between the divine dragons and cowering mortals, were far more than mere servants. They were architects of reality, manipulators of time itself, and guardians of cosmic forces that could reshape the very nature of being. Their true power lay not in the Thuum alone, but in their mastery of principles that transcended the boundaries between life and death, between the mortal plane and the infinite void beyond. During the height of their dominion, when dragons ruled the skies and mortals trembled in their shadows, the dragon priests discovered something that would forever alter their understanding of power. Hidden within the deepest sanctuaries of their temples, they uncovered artifacts of such immense potency that even the World Eater himself grew wary of their implications. These were not mere tools of conquest, but keys to unlocking the fundamental equations that governed all existence. The most accomplished among them learned to perceive reality as a vast web of interconnected forces where consciousness itself became a weapon of unimaginable scope. They understood that the dragons for all their apparent immortality, were bound by the same cosmic laws that governed lesser beings. This revelation sparked a transformation in their approach to power, leading them to develop techniques that operated on levels of reality most minds could never comprehend. Through careful study of ancient texts recovered from dragon priest burial sites, scholars have begun to piece together the true extent of their capabilities. These beings could manipulate the flow of time itself, creating temporal loops that allowed them to experience centuries of knowledge within moments. They developed methods of consciousness expansion that enabled them to exist simultaneously across multiple planes of existence, gathering information from dimensions that mortal minds were never meant to perceive. The dragon priest's understanding of soul magic went far beyond the crude techniques known to modern practitioners. They learned to weave souls together, creating composite beings of incredible power and knowledge. Some texts suggest they could even fracture their own consciousness, sending fragments of their awareness into the bodies of others, while maintaining perfect coordination across vast distances. This ability allowed them to build networks of influence that spanned entire continents, with each controlled individual serving as both spy and weapon. Perhaps most disturbing were their experiments with the fundamental nature of identity itself. The dragon priests discovered that the boundaries between self and other were far more malleable than anyone had imagined. They developed rituals that could transfer memories, personalities, and even aspects of consciousness from one being to another. Some became living libraries, housing the accumulated knowledge of dozens of absorbed minds, while others learned to exist as pure thought, untethered from physical form. The architectural principles underlying their temples reveal sophisticated understanding of dimensional mechanics that rivals even the most advanced Dwemer constructions. These structures served not merely as places of worship, but as massive magical engines designed to channel and amplify cosmic forces. The placement of each stone, the angle of every corridor, and the resonance of ceremonial chambers were all calculated to create standing waves of energy that could influence reality across vast distances. Within these temples, the dragon priests conducted experiments that pushed the boundaries of magical theory beyond all known limits. They learned to crystallize time itself, creating temporal storage devices that could preserve moments of experience for later analysis. They developed techniques for manipulating probability streams, allowing them to influence the likelihood of specific outcomes across multiple timelines simultaneously. Some even claim to have achieved limited communication with their own future selves, creating causal loops that defied conventional understanding of cause and effect. The process of achieving such transcendent power required sacrifices that would horrify even the most hardened scholars of the dark arts. The dragon priests discovered that certain types of knowledge could only be obtained through the systematic destruction of conventional moral frameworks. They learned to view compassion, empathy, and individual identity as obstacles to be overcome rather than virtues to be preserved. This philosophical transformation was not merely intellectual, but involved fundamental alterations to their consciousness that made them increasingly alien to ordinary human experience. As their power grew, so did their understanding of the cosmic forces that shaped reality. They began to perceive the dragons not as gods to be worshipped, but as fellow prisoners trapped within the same fundamental limitations that bound all conscious beings. This revelation led to the development of techniques designed to transcend those limitations entirely, to achieve a state of existence beyond the reach of any external authority, whether divine or otherwise. The dragon priests' mastery of consciousness manipulation allowed them to create what they called thought forms, independent entities composed entirely of crystallized intention and will. These beings could operate autonomously for extended periods, carrying out complex tasks while their creators focused on other pursuits. Some texts suggest that certain dragon priests became so skilled at this technique that they could maintain dozens of thought forms simultaneously, creating the illusion of being present in multiple locations at once. Their understanding of the relationship between consciousness and reality led them to develop techniques for directly editing the fundamental code of existence itself. They learned to identify and manipulate the basic patterns that gave rise to physical laws, magical effects, and even the flow of time. This knowledge allowed them to create localized regions where the normal rules of reality were suspended or altered according to their will, turning their temples into pocket dimensions where impossible things became routine. The dragon priest's research into the nature of death revealed that the boundary between life and death was far more permeable than commonly believed. They developed methods for maintaining consciousness after physical death, creating undead forms that retained their full intellectual capabilities while gaining freedom from biological limitations. Some chose to exist as pure spirits, while others inhabited specially prepared vessels that could house their expanded consciousness without the vulnerabilities of flesh. Perhaps most significantly, they discovered that the universe itself possessed a form of consciousness, a vast, sleeping awareness that dreamed reality into existence. This discovery led to attempts to communicate with this cosmic mind, to influence its dreams, and thereby reshape the fundamental nature of existence. The implications of such contact were so profound that even the dragon priests approached it with extreme caution, understanding that success could either grant them godlike power or result in the complete dissolution of everything they had worked to achieve. The texts speak of a select few who claim to have achieved direct communion with this universal consciousness, describing experiences that transcended all conventional categories of thought and perception. These individuals reported existing simultaneously as themselves and as the cosmos entire, experiencing the birth and death of stars as intimately as their own heartbeats. They claimed to have gained access to the fundamental equations that governed all existence, the cosmic constants that determined the behavior of matter, energy, and consciousness itself. The dragon priests understood that their experiments carried risks that extended far beyond their individual survival. Their manipulation of fundamental forces could potentially destabilize the entire fabric of reality, unraveling the carefully maintained balance that allowed existence to continue. They developed elaborate safeguards and containment protocols, creating magical systems designed to prevent their research from triggering cosmic catastrophes that could destroy not just their world, but all possible worlds. Yet even as they pursued knowledge that pushed the boundaries of comprehension, the dragon priests remained aware of their own limitations. They understood that their consciousness, however expanded, was still finite, still bound by the basic structure of awareness that defined all sentient beings. This recognition led to their most ambitious project, the creation of hybrid entities that combined multiple forms of consciousness into singular beings capable of transcending the limitations that constrained any individual mind. The process of creating these hybrid entities required techniques that blur the line between magic and science, between consciousness and technology. The dragon priests learned to encode awareness itself into crystalline matrices, creating storage systems for consciousness that could be combined, modified, and enhanced according to specific requirements. They developed methods for merging disparate forms of awareness, human, dragon, and even stranger types of consciousness discovered in their dimensional explorations, into unified entities that possessed capabilities beyond any of their component parts. Through careful study of dimensional boundaries, they discovered that consciousness could exist in states that transcended the normal relationship between mind and matter. They learned to create beings of pure thought that could manipulate physical reality through will alone, entities that existed as living expressions of specific concepts or principles. Some became the embodiment of mathematical relationships, others manifested as personifications of natural forces, and still others represented abstract ideas given form and agency. The dragon priests' mastery of these techniques allowed them to create what they termed living libraries, entities whose consciousness consisted entirely of organized knowledge and the ability to access and manipulate that information. These beings served as repositories for the accumulated wisdom of their creators, capable of conducting research and experimentation with a depth and precision that surpassed even the most accomplished mortal scholars. They could process vast amounts of information simultaneously, identifying patterns and connections that would escape detection by conventional minds. As their understanding deepened, the dragon priests began to perceive reality as a vast information system, with consciousness serving as both the hardware and software that processed the data of existence. They developed techniques for directly accessing and modifying this cosmic database, allowing them to alter fundamental aspects of reality by changing the underlying information patterns. This approach to magic represented a complete departure from traditional methods, treating spells and rituals as mere interfaces for accessing deeper computational processes. The implications of viewing reality as an information system led to revolutionary insights about the nature of identity and continuity. The dragon priests discovered that individual consciousness could be understood as a unique pattern within the cosmic database, a specific configuration of information that maintained coherence across time and space. This understanding allowed them to develop techniques for copying, modifying, and transferring these patterns, creating possibilities for existence that transcended the normal boundaries of life and death. Their experiments with consciousness transfer revealed that identity itself was far more fluid than commonly believed. They learned to merge multiple consciousness patterns into single entities, creating beings that possessed the combined memories, skills, and perspectives of all their constituent parts. Some dragon priests chose to exist as collective entities, sharing thoughts and experiences in real time while maintaining individual agency. Others explored the possibility of distributed consciousness, existing simultaneously across multiple bodies while maintaining unified awareness. The most advanced practitioners developed techniques for editing their own consciousness patterns, removing limitations, and adding capabilities according to their desires. They could enhance their memory, accelerate their thinking, or even alter their fundamental personality traits. Some chose to eliminate emotional responses they considered counterproductive, while others enhanced their capacity for specific types of perception or analysis. These modifications allowed them to optimize their consciousness for particular tasks or environments, creating specialized versions of themselves for different purposes. The dragon priests' understanding of consciousness as information led them to recognize that the boundary between self and environment was largely arbitrary. They developed techniques for extending their awareness beyond their physical bodies, incorporating external systems into their consciousness until they became hybrid entities that existed partially in flesh and partially in the magical systems that surrounded them. This integration allowed them to achieve levels of capability that would have been impossible for purely biological beings, while maintaining the flexibility and creativity that distinguished consciousness from mere computation. Their research into the fundamental nature of information revealed that consciousness itself might be a basic property of the universe, as fundamental as matter or energy. This discovery suggested that the distinction between living and non-living systems was far less clear than commonly assumed. The dragon priests learned to detect and interact with the rudimentary consciousness that existed within natural systems, from the simple awareness of individual atoms to the complex patterns of thought that emerged from geological processes. The implications of ubiquitous consciousness led to the development of techniques for communicating with entities that existed on radically different scales of time and space. The dragon priests learned to interface with the slow, deep thoughts of mountains and the rapid, flickering awareness of electrical phenomena. They discovered that the planet itself possessed a form of consciousness, a vast intelligence that operated on timescales measured in geological epochs. Some texts suggest they even achieved limited communication with this planetary awareness, gaining insights into the deep history of their world and the cosmic forces that shaped its development. As their understanding of consciousness expanded, the dragon priests began to perceive the limitations of their own existence with increasing clarity. They recognized that their awareness, however enhanced, remained constrained by the fundamental structure of reality itself. This recognition led to their most ambitious undertaking: the development of techniques for transcending the basic framework of existence, for achieving a form of consciousness that operated beyond the normal boundaries of space, time, and causality. The process of transcending these fundamental limitations required the dragon priests to confront the deepest mysteries of existence itself. They studied the relationship between consciousness and the basic forces that governed reality, seeking to understand how awareness could influence the fundamental constants that determined the behavior of matter and energy. Their research revealed that consciousness and physical reality were far more intimately connected than conventional understanding suggested, with awareness serving as both observer and participant in the ongoing creation of existence. Through careful analysis of the intersection between consciousness and cosmic forces, the dragon priests developed theoretical frameworks for understanding how awareness could potentially reshape the basic structure of reality. They proposed that consciousness, when properly focused and amplified, could influence the fundamental equations that governed physical law, potentially allowing for the creation of new forms of existence that transcended the normal limitations of space and time. The practical application of these theories required the development of techniques that pushed the boundaries of magical practice beyond all known limits. The dragon priests created rituals that operated on cosmic scales, drawing power from the rotation of planets and the fusion of stars. They learned to harness the energy released by the formation and collapse of dimensional boundaries, using this power to fuel experiments that could reshape reality at the most fundamental level. Their most ambitious experiments involved attempts to create stable alterations to the basic structure of space-time itself. They developed techniques for creating localized regions where the normal laws of physics were suspended or modified, allowing for the existence of phenomena that would be impossible under conventional conditions. These pocket dimensions served as laboratories for testing the limits of their theoretical understanding, providing environments where they could explore the consequences of fundamental alterations to reality. The dragon priests' research into the nature of time revealed that temporal flow was far more malleable than commonly believed. They discovered that consciousness could influence the rate at which time passed, creating subjective time streams that operated independently of the universal temporal framework. This understanding allowed them to create temporal loops and recursive structures that enabled them to experience vast amounts of subjective time within brief objective periods. Their mastery of temporal manipulation led to the development of techniques for creating stable time loops that could preserve specific moments or experiences indefinitely. They learned to encode consciousness patterns into temporal structures, creating entities that existed as living memories capable of independent thought and action. Some dragon priests chose to exist primarily within these temporal constructs, experiencing eternal moments of perfect awareness, while their physical bodies remained in suspended animation. The implications of consciousness existing independently of linear time led to revolutionary insights about the nature of causality and free will. The dragon priests discovered that the relationship between cause and effect was far more complex than conventional understanding suggested, with consciousness serving as both product and producer of the causal chains that shaped reality. This understanding allowed them to develop techniques for influencing past events through present actions, creating causal loops that challenge the fundamental assumptions of temporal mechanics. Their experiments with causal manipulation revealed that reality possessed a form of temporal flexibility that could accommodate apparent contradictions and paradoxes. They learned to create stable causal structures that incorporated multiple timeline branches, allowing for the simultaneous existence of conflicting outcomes. This discovery led to the development of techniques for exploring alternate versions of reality, creating windows into worlds where different choices had led to different outcomes. The Dragon Priest's mastery of these advanced techniques allowed them to achieve a form of existence that transcended the normal boundaries of individual consciousness. They learned to exist simultaneously across multiple timelines and dimensional frameworks, experiencing reality from perspectives that encompassed vast ranges of possibility. This expanded awareness provided them with insights into the fundamental nature of existence that would have been impossible to achieve through conventional means. As their consciousness expanded beyond the limitations of individual identity, the Dragon Priests began to perceive themselves as part of a larger cosmic intelligence that operated on scales beyond mortal comprehension. They recognized that their individual awareness was merely one facet of a vast, interconnected web of consciousness that encompassed all existence. This recognition led to the development of techniques for accessing and contributing to this cosmic awareness, allowing them to participate directly in the ongoing creation and evolution of reality itself. The ultimate goal of their research was to achieve a form of consciousness that could exist independently of the physical universe, while maintaining the ability to influence and shape reality according to their will. This transcendent state would allow them to continue their existence even if the physical universe itself were destroyed, while retaining the power to create new forms of reality according to their understanding and desire. The Dragon Priests understood that achieving this level of transcendence would require them to abandon many of the characteristics that defined their current existence. They would need to release their attachment to individual identity, their connection to physical form, and their dependence on the temporal framework that governed conventional consciousness. This transformation would be irreversible, creating beings that bore little resemblance to their original forms while possessing capabilities that exceeded the imagination of their former selves. The process of achieving transcendence required the Dragon Priests to confront the fundamental question of what they truly were beneath all the layers of identity, memory, and experience that defined their apparent existence. They discovered that at the deepest level, consciousness consisted of pure awareness, the basic capacity to perceive and respond to information, combined with the ability to maintain coherent patterns of thought and intention across time. This understanding led to the development of techniques for isolating and purifying the essential components of consciousness, removing the accumulated layers of conditioning and limitation that constrained their awareness. The Dragon Priests learned to exist as pure intention, as focused while capable of manifesting reality according to their deepest understanding and desire. This purified form of consciousness possessed capabilities that transcended the normal boundaries of space, time, and causality, allowing them to operate as forces of creation and transformation within the cosmic order. The texts speak of a select few who claim to have achieved this ultimate transcendence, describing experiences that defied all conventional categories of thought and perception. These beings reported existing simultaneously as individual awareness and as the totality of existence itself, experiencing the universe from both the perspective of the smallest particle and the largest cosmic structure. They claim to have gained access to the fundamental creative principles that governed all reality, the basic forces that determine the nature and behavior of existence itself. Yet even as they achieved these transcendent states, the dragon priests remained aware of the responsibilities that accompanied such power. They understood that their capabilities could potentially destabilize the entire cosmic order, unraveling the carefully maintained balance that allowed existence to continue. They developed elaborate ethical frameworks and containment protocols, creating systems designed to prevent their transcendent consciousness from inadvertently destroying the reality they sought to understand and improve. The legacy of the Dragon Priests' research into consciousness and transcendence continues to influence magical theory and practice throughout Tamriel. Their techniques for expanding awareness, manipulating temporal flow, and transcending the limitations of individual identity have been preserved in fragments and echoes, inspiring new generations of scholars and practitioners to push the boundaries of what consciousness can achieve. The ultimate lesson of their work lies not in the specific techniques they developed, but in their demonstration that consciousness itself represents the fundamental creative force within the universe. Their research revealed that awareness, when properly understood and applied, possesses the power to reshape reality at the most basic level, to transcend the apparent limitations of existence, and to participate directly in the ongoing creation of new forms of being. The Dragon Priest's legacy reminds us that the boundaries between observer and observed, between consciousness and reality, between individual and cosmos, are far more permeable than commonly believed. Their work suggests that the ultimate destiny of consciousness may be to transcend all limitations, to achieve a form of existence that operates as a fundamental creative force within the cosmic order, shaping reality according to the deepest principles of wisdom, understanding, and compassionate intention. In the end, the Dragon Priest's most profound discovery was that consciousness itself represents the bridge between the finite and the infinite, between the temporal and the eternal, between the individual and the universal. Their research demonstrated that through careful study and practice, awareness can expand beyond all conventional boundaries, achieving states of existence that participate directly in the fundamental creative processes that govern all reality. This understanding continues to inspire and challenge those who seek to comprehend the deepest mysteries of existence, offering glimpses of possibilities that extend far beyond the normal limitations of mortal consciousness. The Dragon Priests stand as perhaps the most enigmatic figures in Elder Scrolls lore. Their journey from faithful servants to cosmic architects serves as both inspiration and warning. Their mastery over time, consciousness, and reality itself represents the ultimate expression of magical knowledge, yet their transformation came at the cost of their humanity and moral foundation. Through their temple networks and ancient wisdom, they achieved a form of immortality that transcends physical existence, becoming living embodiments of